Well, welcome everybody. It's nice to see you virtually. One of these days, we might have some in-person events again, but
That'd be great.
grateful that I won't say I've mastered because I certainly haven't, but I've learned how to use Zoom. So it's a good tool out there. We're really privileged to have Mr. Russell Jones with us today. And I call him Mr. Hearing because that's what he does. He helps people hear. And he's a master with the hearing aid issues. But more than that, he's a master at helping you understand how your hearing impacts everything you do, from your health to your attitudes to your ability to relate to other people. I had an interesting time this past year where, not due to hearing, but I had to have one of my ears, basically everything inside of it was taken out. So I have one ear now that hears. It's a big difference and it's interesting. So I've become very aware that hearing is something you can't take for granted. You have to take care of it. And I guess maybe all those years of too loud music might have had little to do with something with me. But Dr. Jones, we're so glad that you can join us today. We were talking earlier, I think that we met close to 20 years ago. And I have enjoyed every time I've gotten together and been able to have conversations with him. And by the way, he can quote poetry like you wouldn't believe. So maybe you can do a little taste of that too. So anyway, a man of many talents and a man that can be depended on to give you the straight scoop on how hearing aids and devices can or maybe can't work for you. So I'm going to let you take it from there and put myself on mute and listen very carefully with my good ear.
Well, thank you, Gary. I've got to tell you all, I'm very happy to be here. And I've been in the hearing aid business for 25 years. And I got into it because I was next to a landmine in Vietnam that went off sort of at the wrong place at the wrong time. The place was right next to a landmine that I didn't know was there. And the time I was right there when it went off. And when I got my first hearing aid, I literally 25 years ago, got it out of the office. I walked across the street into a Wendy's restaurant. I could hear the little girl on the other side of the counter. I almost started crying. I went right back into the hearing aid office and I said to the guy, I said, man, I love these things. These are terrific. They're fantastic. I said, how do you get into the business? You know? And the guy looks at me and he sticks his finger, he looks right at me. He says, you're hired. And I've been in the business ever since. So that's exactly how it worked out. And so it's been very satisfying for me. And what do I do? I want to first talk about a little bit in terms of communicating with people who have hearing loss. And the first real important feature, frankly, is attitude. It's really a big deal to have the right attitude with people, because people with hearing loss, they're most of the time, the folks that you guys have to deal with, they're going toward the last chapter in the book, and they don't really want a caregiver. Let's face it, they'd rather do things on their own. And what they're and if you ask them what it is that they'd really like for you to do, a lot of times some people want a co-pilot. Some of them want a flight attendant to just get them drinks, and you're going to have a lot of different things. But the attitude is really an important one. And in terms of people who are working with people with hearing loss, don't realize how difficult it is for them to communicate with you. And I tell people is just a couple of things you've got to keep in mind. The first thing is you've got to make sure you get their attention. And that's without screaming at them or anything else, but you've got to get their attention. Second, you've got to get, for many people with serious hearing loss, the distance is a big deal. I tell some of my patients, I said, look, you're a 5-foot person for the rest of your life. What that means is you've got to get people within 5 feet of you. And the third thing I tell them is, look, you've got to control the situation. You've got to get people to understand that if they want to talk to you, they have to cooperate a little bit in terms of what you need in order for them, for you to hear them. And it's a funny kind of a thing. I mean, I'm going to use somebody. I know she wouldn't mind this, but I just got to tell you, you probably all heard of the Watermill family. It's a big family in LA, in Honolulu, and they have their own wing of the museum, you know. But Mrs. Watermill's a patient of mine for a long time. She calls me all the time. She says, I can't hear my kids on my cell phone. And they said, if they call the landline, I can hear them. But if they call on the cell phone, I can't hear them. I said, Mrs. Watermill, have you ever asked them where the phone is? I said, have you ever asked them whether they're putting the phone on the table and walking all over their apartment and they're 15, 20 feet away from their phone? That's why you can't hear them on the phone. On the landline, they got to pick it up and put it up to their ear so you hear them perfectly. Tell your kids to pick up the darn phone. Now, you know, she's a person that you think people have bent over backwards in order to get them to cooperate. Will she tell her kids that? No, she won't tell them that. They're all going to get rich as soon as she passes away, you know, but she's a funny bird. But so you want to, you've got to get the attention. People have got to be able to control the situation a little bit. The distance is very important. If you're a caregiver and you've got somebody who's having a lot of trouble, you want to get their attention. You want to get within 5 or 6 feet to make sure that you're at a good distance for them. And you can ask them. And if there's any kind of background noise, you got to go to a serious effort in order to cut the background noise down. And so that means that if they've got a lanai door that's wide open, you may have to close the lanai door so that you can hear with them. So you've got, you know, you got that situation where you got the attention before you start talking. You've got the distance under, you've got the background noise situation, and you want to look them straight in the eye. A lot of people you hear, of course, people all the time. You know, my wife is always talking to me when she's walking away from me into the kitchen. I wouldn't be surprised if Gary has this problem. Then you've got a situation where you've got people, they mumble or they look at other things, but you want to look straight at them. And then perhaps the most important of all, I tell them, look, clearly and slowly is much more important than louder. They don't really, for most people that have hearing loss, they can have a very serious hearing loss. You don't have to talk super loud, but if you're looking right at them, you're within 5 feet, you're talking slowly and clearly, they can hear quite well. And they're going to do very well. And that's the key thing. But you want to, as a caregiver, you want to be consistent in terms of how you're dealing with people. So every time you talk to them, believe me, it is important to them. They have a very narrow window onto the world. A lot of the time are bedbound or they're not going out very much. Their life is so limited. And I had a guy stop me one time up at the Hawaii Kai Retirement Committee. He said, you know, I envy you. And I said, what are you talking about? He says, I see you all the time. You're rushing here, rushing there, and you're always in a hurry to go do something. He says, you know, all week long, all I do is wait for Saturday when my kids come to visit. It's my life. He says, all I do. I sit and I wait here until they can come and visit. And you know, with the people who have got a caregiver, that caregiver is a lot more company to them than their family is, because they see them a lot more. And so the attitude that you have when you're working with them is a very big deal in terms of how they see you. Now, you don't have to be their pal, but you can be courteous and friendly and try to help them in a way. And your attitude is very, very, very important. And of course, I probably don't need to tell this group because I see the ladies up here that I'm looking at, and they look like a very serious group. But remember to leave your troubles at home. Don't take your troubles to where you work. It's not fair to the people you're working for, and they won't even know the reason you're unhappy, but it translates to them, and it makes it very hard. Now, some of you may know this story about Helen Keller. It's a wonderful story that I've thought of for years. You may know Helen Keller was both blind and deaf. And they asked her, every once in a while, someone would say, Miss Keller, if you had a choice between being blind or being deaf, which would you rather be? If you had to be one or the other, you didn't have a choice. Yeah, it had to be one or the other. She said, oh, that's very easy. She said, I'd much rather be blind than deaf. And everybody who listens to that thinks that's exactly the opposite of what you'd expect her to say. And she said, there's no question about it. She said, I can tell you exactly why. She said, the reason is that when you're blind, you lose track of things. But when you're deaf, you lose track of people. And for years, I used to think about that as what kind of an analogy would make the best sense to understand that. And I thought to myself, well, you know, if you had a Thanksgiving dinner and around the table was everybody that you've ever loved in your life, all the most important people you've ever been with, and they were all at the table, and you're having Thanksgiving dinner, and everybody's laughing and yelling, having a good time and telling funny stories and lying about how successful they've been. And you were blind, but you could hear, you'd be a part of the conversation. You'd be laughing alongside them. You'd be listening to the stories. You couldn't see them, but you know who was talking. You know what they were thinking. You know what happiness they shared and what happiness they haven't shared, what their disappointments have been. You'd be a real part of the whole organization. But if you were deaf and you could see, what are you doing? You're watching people have fun. You're watching people have fun. And I'll tell you a very strange personal thing that really, frankly, surprises me. My own hearing has gotten worse and worse and worse and worse. And now, for the last 4 years, I've had some patients that were very nice to me, and they every once in a while, somebody will give me a gift certificate. And I now have $250 in gift certificate at Assaggio's Italian restaurant. I can't bring myself to eat in a restaurant. I just can't do it. I can't, I wouldn't be able to hear a damn thing. I couldn't go with any friends. And I have got no desire to go into a restaurant and watch everybody have fun. It's not that I don't want them to have fun. I like the idea of having fun, but I don't want to sit there and watch them have fun. That doesn't do a thing for me. And it's a funny kind of a reaction, but I think people with really serious hearing loss, a lot of times that's a reaction that sometimes you have, you know, it's a funny kind of a thing. Anyway, so that's kind of the way I always think with that Helen Keller story. It's a very big deal. And hearing better is, you know, we always think of it in terms of the importance of getting the words clear. The words aren't the big deal. It's, believe it or not, it's feelings. The reason the talking is more important for Helen Keller to hear than the eyesight is you understand how people feel about things, and you communicate on an emotional level through what you hear, not through what you see. And you probably heard that old expression where people say, you know, you'll never remember what they say, but you'll always remember the way they made you feel. And if you think back, you know, on the people that you've known your whole life, it's really the way people made you feel that has stayed with you your whole life. And the people you remember the most a lot of times. You can't, there's all kinds of aspects of the relationship you're not going to remember, but you remember that you share that. And when you're working with these people that are approaching the last chapter of their life, and you are essentially the door that they walk through to see whatever they see of the outside world, the more you can do the setup so that when the more important the person is who visits them, the more important their hearing is. Because when they get the people that they really love, they understanding the way they feel, the way that their visitors feel, their kids, their grandkids, the way they feel, and what they're thinking and feeling, not just between each other, but about their life and about the different things they want to achieve and do and where they want to go and visit and everything else, that they talk to their maybe their granddad at, or in many of the people I've worked with, their great granddad or great grandmother. It's what they're going to remember, and the sharing of the emotion. And hearing aids are critically important, because if you start to hear a little bit better, then you hear the words, but then you've got to hear a little bit better, and then you can get the emotional, what they're saying, understand their feelings behind it. I don't need to tell you that there used to be like back when Letterman and some of these other guys had very, very popular late night shows, and husband and wife are downstairs, and the wife might say to the husband, honey, let's go up and watch TV. That can mean a lot of different things. It might mean that she really wants you to watch Letterman, but maybe she wants to play whatever they do, and so it how a person says something is very important, and it can be very subtle. And if you can't hear them very well, you don't know the difference. And that can be a big deal between husband and wife. And there's a lot of things that have to do with that. So, and for instance, I try to keep humorous little stories in my mind so I can tell people, because there's a lot of people I work with and they never hear jokes. They haven't heard. I had people have told me it's been 5 years since they laughed at a joke, And I was telling Gary and Leanne before we started. I said, I've got a little story that I wasn't sure if it was appropriate for this group, but what the hell, I'm going to tell you anyway. Back in Colorado, when I was first starting out, I had an old geezer who drove down from the mountains about 3 hours. He was a cranky old guy, sort of an old cowboy type, and he didn't know me and he didn't trust me very much, I don't think. But I got his hearing aid working, and he was in the waiting room. And I normally like to check people's ears out, and make sure that there's not a lot of wax in there or something like that. So I said to him, I said, sir, as long as you drove all the way down from the mountains, why don't you come on in the examination room and let me look in your ear? We'll check everything out, make sure everything's okay. He looked at me like I was nuts. So I said it again. I said, sir, as long as you drove all the way down, why don't you come on in the examination room? Let me look in your ear. We'll check everything out, make sure everything's okay. He looked at me, thought about it. He looked at me. He said, son, why in the name of God would you want to look in my rear? And I thought to myself, that was really funny. I've had a number of funny things that have happened, but people get the wrong thing sometimes, and sometimes they get a little mad doing it. Okay. So it's really a big deal, and as far as helping to communicate, having a good attitude, making sure that they can help you. I mean, you're giving them on a daily basis a lot of valuable information, and they want to be able to hear you. And half the time when people say old people are so cranky and they're so hard to live with, half the time they just can't hear you. And so after you ask them to repeat something, and then you ask them to repeat a second time, and then you ask them to repeat a third time, they get mad at you because you can't hear them. Well, then you get mad because they're getting mad. And pretty soon everybody's mad. And it's a very unpleasant and unfortunate situation. So you want to make their life easier, and that's to help them control the communication, and you help control the communication by remembering that they can't hear very well unless you position yourself in the right place, speak clearly, speak quietly, and so they can help. You know, a lot of you and my guess is that some folks here may supervise other people that do what you do. Uh, Particularly people have an accent. You've got to give them a chance to try and realize that people a lot of times can't hear very well if it's an accent. I tell you another very quick, interesting story. My I had a lady who was a engineering professor at UH. She was a supervisor of the engineering department, and she was Japanese. And she had a daughter who had been bringing her to see me and get hearing aids for her. Strangely enough, the mother always wanted the daughter. The mother, of course, as you can imagine, spoke English perfectly. I mean, she taught at UH for over 20 years. So you know she could speak English perfectly. Didn't have any accent at all. But she insisted that her daughter speak Japanese, as her hearing was about 85% gone. And her hearing aid helped her. She could basically hear English and she was perfectly fluent in both, but she understood emotions and what her daughter meant much better if she could speak Japanese. The daughter didn't want to speak. She didn't want to speak Japanese. She was full-blown 100% American, but she'd learned Japanese when she was a child. And it was funny how that assisted. But just that little bit of familiarity from when she was a child can make a big deal. Okay, now we're zooming along. I'm looking at my time here, and I'm probably running against it. What do we got? About 10 more minutes, something like that. Now I have to apologize. I could go on for the next hour and a half. I want to talk a little bit about Alzheimer's and hearing loss. Now, there's a lot of people that think and have implied in advertising and various other things that hearing loss causes Alzheimer's. That has not been proven. And what the most current thinking is that they're both caused by the same thing. And the most current thorough research is indicating that there are what they call microvascular veins in the brain that delivers the blood to both the hearing section of the brain and the Alzheimer's section of the brain are right next to each other. And they're thinking now that the blood is not being delivered to the hearing aid, the hearing portion and successfully as you get older and for a lot of other reasons. And that may be part of the problem. So there's a lot of work now on working with getting better blood flow. And I'll tell you a sort of an interesting kind of thing. I had a patient who had sudden deafness. Now, I'm going to backtrack a little bit on this for right now. There are 3 things that you should know about real quick that if you are exposed to in any way, you've got to get help right away. Now, if you have a patient that has sudden deafness, that means that sometimes people wake up and they're completely deaf on one side or both sides, but usually it's one side. They'll wake up and they're completely deaf. That is usually because the blood flow to the cochlea has been interrupted for some kind of a reason. And you've got about, and the hearing is very sensitive to blood flow, as I said, and you got to do something about that in 72 hours. You got to get something done right away. Usually what they do is they inject steroids in there and deal with that way. And about 50% of the time it comes back. The second thing is when you get a bad smell. It sounds gross, but the fact is a lot of times you'll get a fungus infection or something in the ears. The ear canals do not flush properly very well. And so a lot of times it doesn't flush and then it just gets worse and worse and worse. And that's got to be taken care of right away. And then the third thing is pain in the ears. believe it or not, you've got a serious medical issue with hearing loss, but it doesn't hurt. And so it's a lot of times but when you get pain, just to give you an idea, I've been doing this 25 years. The number of people that I've met that had serious pain in their ears were less than 10 people in 25 years. And I've worked with about 6,000 people. So it doesn't come up very often, but when it does, they've got to get to an emergency room. So it's a big deal to remember that. But I had a patient that was in Colorado. I have a couple of guys that still fly out here to see me from Colorado. Luckily for me, they got plenty of dough. But he got sudden deafness, and he called me 2 hours later. It was a Friday night, and I said to him, he said he called his audiologist, and the audiologist said, well, we'll see how you're doing by Monday. And I said, you can't wait until Monday. You got to get something done tonight, Friday night. You've got to get it done. So he did. He got something done, but he went about 2 weeks, and and still didn't come back. And I said, I told him this thing that I read about with the blood flow for both the Alzheimer's and hearing, and he went and got some stuff on blood, like beetroot, the super beets and these kind of things. And within about 3 days, his hearing came back on that side. I don't know whether it had something to do with that or not, but I had, and I just tell you this because I just think this circulation thing is a serious issue. Last Friday, I went to a technical conference all Friday morning at the Ala Moana Hotel, and then afterwards I went over to the Ala Moana mall to watch people. I like to read and watch people. So I'm reading by 1 o'clock. Of course, I was ready to go to sleep right in front of about 6,000 tourists. So I said, well, I better take one of these 5-hour energy drinks. And I look and it's got, 15,000 times the amount of niacin, and some of these other things are in there. So I said, well, and they said, don't worry about the flush, the niacin flush, all this stuff. So I took the bottle carefully, and 15 minutes later, I'm waiting to see whether I'm going to die. And 15 minutes later, believe it or not, my hearing aids were too loud. And I said, this is weird. I said, it's way too loud for the crowd. And I said, I thought that was strange. And it was like, I do this for a living. It's about 10 to 12% louder than I could be comfortable with. So finally, I turned it down, and I was good for the rest of the afternoon, about 10 to 15% lower than what I'd ever had it before. Now, does that mean something? I don't know. We had, but that drink is meant to give you a lot more blood flow, and so so now I've got 2 different technical guys that are passing that story all over the mainland because they think the guys who do these things for a living ought to look at this kind of thing. But anyway, so we've got that. It's what they're saying, by the way, is that do hearing aids help with Alzheimer's? Yes, they do. They don't cause it, but they think it helps. And the best way to think about it is they think that using a hearing aid is one of the very few controllable environmental things you can do to help with your Alzheimer's. And what it is, the way to think about it is that think of the hearing aids as being like an exercise bike for the brain. And what it does is it keeps the brain more active, and it keeps you lively, it keeps things going around. And they're thinking now anywhere from 8 to 12% help with regards to Alzheimer's in terms of when it comes on strong and how strong it is. So there's very strong belief among the research people that the hearing aids will help with the Alzheimer's. It's not going to stop it from happening. What's going to happen is going to happen, but it does help. So I tell people it's frankly a pretty good reason for getting hearing aids, even if you don't think they're going to help you get along with your wife better. But it's a pretty good thing. Now let me just see here. I'm about out of time here if I get this straight. Okay, the hearing aids. I want to talk about hearing aids and prices because. No, I don't. I'm going to do something else instead. Working with people as a caregiver, there are a couple of practice habits that I would highly recommend. The first one is I tell everybody to get a glass or a cup or something like that You put it right next to the person's bed and you say to them, listen, when you get this hearing aid, there's only two places you want this hearing aid to be. One is in your ears and the other one is in this cup. Make it, you don't want it anyplace else at any time. It's in your ears or in the cup. Don't put it on the table. Don't put it anyplace else. Put it one place or the other, because they all get lost. Where they get lost most of the time is where they have caregivers. And what it does, I'm convinced it ends up in the sheets. And you don't want your hearing aids to end up in the sheets because they will get laundered and you'll never see them again. The second thing is you want to carefully look at your patients with regards to manual dexterity and eyesight. When the eyesight and the manual dexterity go, at some point, you're going to have to put the hearing aids in the ears and take them out. And it's easy to do. It's not hard to do. And you just have to be gentle and careful, and they'll go right in. And it works out fine. The next thing is make sure they're working. When you take a hearing aid and it's turned on, you can cup it in your hands, and it will make a little screeching noise, and you can hear it very easily. You want to make sure you're getting that noise. If you don't get that noise, it's not working. What's happening when you're doing this is the sound's coming out of the hearing aid, bouncing around inside your hand and going right back into the microphone. So you want to do that, and that will tell you whether it's working. It's a good, simple, easy way to check whether the hearing aid's working. Next, on the batteries, 70% of the time when a hearing aid is not working, stop working. 70% of the time, maybe 75% of the time, it's the tip that goes into the ear. In other words, the part that goes down the canal, that tip has got gunk in it and it's got wax or something like that. So the first place, anytime you get one that's not working, it's about 30% likelihood that it's the battery, but the biggest chance is that tip. So you want to get down there and use a little brush, maybe an old toothbrush, or if your hearing guy's any good, he gave you one of those little brushes, and brush that tip off. Or you just don't want to go too deep with a pick, but you can get through that, look under the light and get closer. And the batteries, you're going to have positive and negative. Every one of the batteries comes with, most of them come with a little strip on them. When you pull the strip off, air goes into those batteries. They're called zinc air batteries. That activates the chemicals inside the battery and it starts dying. And even if you don't use it, it's going to be dead in about 2.5 weeks. So you got to use them once you pull that strip off. Do not pull the strip off. Assume that battery is dead and don't keep them. Get rid of them. Once that strip comes off, within a week or two, throw it away. And the next thing is that all the hearing aids have gotten now almost all the good ones are rechargeable. And the rechargeable hearing aids are working very good. The new batteries, the new kind of batteries are very good, and they're lasting 2 to 3 years. And it's a lot easier, particularly when you've got people with bad manual dexterity and eyesight. So that's basically the key thing there. Now, a couple of other things. We've got the hearing aids cost anywhere from $25, which is how much I paid for my first one, and $3,000, which is what I've got in my ears right now when I'm talking to you. And the $25 was from the Radio Shack hearing place, and I used to put it on my belt, and I ran a wire up underneath my shirt and then ran it up along the side. My sister used to say, "What was I trying to do? Look like a Secret Service agent?" I said, "Absolutely, I look like a Secret Service agent," but I couldn't hear worth a damn. But they worked pretty good until I got serious about it. But the thing I want to mention to you today is that answers the key question: what's the difference between a $600 hearing aid, which is about the lowest price that I sell, and $3,000 hearing aids that I sell? They have different levels. The high-end hearing aids are going to be about $6,000 a pair, around $6,000, $6,500. The medium premium ones are around $4,500. And the basic premium ones are around $2,500, $2,600. So that's sort of what you're looking at: $65, $45, $2,500, and then underneath that, $1,000 each, about $2,000, and then $1,200 each. So you've got them now. Of course, begs the question, what the heck is the difference between inexpensive and more expensive? Two things. One is fidelity is better. It just sounds nicer. You know, you got those old fashioned AM, FM radios. They sound fine. They sound fine. But if you compare them to a Bose Wave stereo, it's no comparison. So some people feel that's very important, particularly if they like music, but other people don't give a darn. So that's one thing. But the most important thing is background noise reduction. And every step you get much better background. Not going to go into the technical reasons now, but you're buying better, more sophisticated technology that gives the hearing aid guy a better way to fit them so that you're happy with them, which is always my primary goal. You want the person to be glad they got what they got. So that's what you get. And I tell people the same thing all the time. Get the best that you can fit in your budget. Everybody's got a different budget. Get the best you can fit in your budget. And I've never had anybody say to me, gee, I'm sorry I bought the good one. I've never had anybody do that. I mean, how many Mercedes owners do you have walking around going, geez, I'm sorry I bought that damn Mercedes? You don't hear that too often. But that's sort of the difference between them. Just a couple of more comments. The recharging ability is a very big deal. And now 60–70% of the ones that I'm selling are rechargeable. Second of all, they have very good television transmitters. And this is a big deal for somebody that's bedbound. They're watching, 10, 15 hours of TV a day. It sends a signal directly from the television set to the hearing aids. It's clear as a bell, and they work really, really well. And then the anybody that you know that's shopping for hearing aids, make sure they get the feeling that they feel that the person they're working with is trustworthy, and they trust this kind of service they're getting, and make sure that they've got a trial period. If the person's not happy, there are two ways that people work in this business. One way is they try to pretend they're doctors. They wear the white jacket. I mean, I almost wore my white jacket today. Would you have been more impressed if I wore a white jacket? But Gary doesn't have his three-piece suit on. But I'll bet you wear it when you have those fancy dinners where you get people to give you lots of money. But anyway, but they wear the white jackets, and they like to pretend that they're giving people the right solution to their problem. And they're saying this is they imply this is the prescription that you need to hear better. And what happens after that? People say, I never was happy, and I kept going back there. And the guy said, you have to get used to it. You have to get used to it. And here I am, 2 years later, and I never liked the goddamn thing. So I spent $6,000 on it. And then the other way to approach it is that, yeah, we've got best fit, but that's just a starting point. I wear hearing aids. I've worn them now for 25 years, and I don't care what best fit is. I want them the way I want them. So when you work with people, if you can, at least I try. I want them to get them the way they like them, and then And I get people who come into my office all the time. They say, "Listen, I think I'd like a little adjustment." And then they'll look me in the eye and they go, "But not much." And when a person says not much, you're pretty close to being where they want them. And then it's pretty good. So that's basically it. I'd like to give you my phone number so that if we're just about done, if you got any questions, don't hesitate to call me. I'll be glad to answer them for you. And I can, one way or the other, I can, if I don't know the answer to something, have anything to do with hearing or hearing loss or hearing aids, I can find somebody that will help you. Anyway, it's 808-282-1899. Once ago, 808-282-1899. My name's Russ. It's Russell Hearing Aids is my company. And I've been out here for 20 years. That's what I was talking to Gary about. I met Gary right after I got here in the fall of 2004. And he was starting this very ambitious foundation. And I said, wow, I've never met anybody that started a foundation. I thought to myself, this guy must be a dreamer And here he is. He made the dreams come true. You got to admire somebody like that. Anyway, by the way, you turkey, you should have told me about that ear. You can get your probably, is it your right ear that still works?
No, the left.
Left. You're probably pushing everybody over to the left side when you're
Mhm.
talking to them. But you can get a bicross that will send the sound from the one to the side to the other. And I give you such a deal.
I did read
Anyway,
up on those.
but you ought to think about that. And they don't have to be $6,000. In fact, that's not too expensive just with one side, because if you're normal on the other side, it's something fairly easy to do, but it can make quite a difference. And it'll help you with your balance, by the way. Okay, so I overstayed my welcome, I'm sure, but are there any questions? Gary?
Yes, we do have a few questions in the chat, and if we were all in the room in person, we would giving you our applause, because there's so many nuggets and pieces of helpful information during your talk. We have a few questions. First, what advice would you give to those who refuse to use their hearing aids due to feedback noise?
Okay, the feedback noise is there because that when you put the sound into the ear, the mold that's in there that is around the little thing where the sound comes out, that's like a cork. It's as simple as a cork. And when you stick it in there, the sound, if the cork is no good, too small, wrong shape, worn out, shrunken, the sound just goes right by the cork and comes dripping out, just like wine would come out of a bottle you've got in your icebox on its side. And what it does is it comes out and goes into the air, and then it goes right back into the microphone on the outside, and it goes around in a circle. And that's what causes it. It's always a fit problem. It hasn't been fitted problem, and that is what I tell people, that if I do my job right, they should like their hearing aids. But that's one of the things that you're responsible for if you fit hearing aids. And there are a lot of other things you can do on that problem, but they got to get the mold right. And sometimes you've got to adjust the volume and various other things. But that's a correctable problem, and there's no reason in the world people should have it. So that can always be fixed.
Okay. Another question. You've mentioned that hearing aids should be tested in the environment in which it will be used. However, many audiologists test the hearing aids in their practice rooms. Would you care to comment?
Well, the world is full of people who said, when I was in the hearing aid office, I heard great. And then when I got home, the thing stunk. One of the reasons that I like working with Gary and your folks, where I go to people's homes, I've got about 500 people here where I go to their homes. And if you fit people in a home, they're not going to say, when I went home, it didn't work. You got to get it to work in their home. So, it's pretty straightforward. And I've had people lots of times when I take I put the wife in the kitchen and put the husband in the living room, and I say, okay, talk to him and see if he can hear you, And then sometimes I got to say, okay, come with me, and I walk her out of the kitchen, and I say, you got to get this close if you want to be able to talk to him. He's a 5-foot guy, or he's an 8-foot guy, and he's going to be here. And by the way, you got to stop looking out the window for your dog when you're trying to talk to your husband, And so but the truth is, some guys, sometimes I think, I'm not at all sure that I'm the best hearing guy in the world, but I certainly am one of the most stubborn. And, sometimes you've just got to figure out what's going to work. And sometimes it's not so easy. There are a lot of things. I could take another 15 minutes and talk about the things that can go wrong, but but that's, they really should be able to handle that. And sometimes if there's a feedback issue in terms of I'm not talking about the screeching, I'm talking about the response of the person who's got the hearing aids. See, some people can't describe what they're experiencing very well. I mean, you guys run into that all the time. You have medical issues, they can't describe what the problem is, and they can't describe why the hearing aids are not working right. And they don't even, they don't know what words to use. And so sometimes you spend half your time trying to figure out what they're really trying to tell you, but you've got to be willing to listen. You got to try on it. That's why the trust in the person they're working with is such a big deal.
Okay, and one final question, for old hearing aids, is there any further use for them?
Well, I have a lot of people give me hearing aids, give their old hearing aids, and someone passes away. So one of them, I got a whole bunch of stuff from one of your people one time, and I sent them to the Starkey Foundation, which is a foundation in Minnesota, and it's the Starkey Foundation is the third biggest manufacturer in the United States of hearing aids. I sell a lot of their hearing aids, but they refurbish them and give them to people who can't afford them. So that's what I do with them. But that sometimes, but a lot of times, you see, a 4-year-old. Let's take a 4 or 5-year-old hearing aid. A 4 or 5-year-old hearing aid. A lot of people wear a hearing aid from 8 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock at night, every day for 4 years. Now it's a mechanical instrument, and it's like, I mean, if you talked on your landline phone for 12 hours a day, all day long, 365 days a year for 4 years, the phone will break, and what happens is they're so worn out that there's just nothing left. And a lot of times the hearing aids companies, after I just got one this morning, I delivered a 6-year-old hearing aid, and they sent them in for repair. Well, you see, they don't want to repair a 5-year-old hearing aid because they know they're going to have to give them practically a brand new one for the price of the repair. So they charged me $75 extra because it was after 5 years, but he got 2 brand new hearing aids. They replaced the hearing aids. So he got 2 brand new hearing aids for $700, and they were $6,000 hearing aids when he bought them. So
Russell, thank you so much for all of this great information. And I think our advertising was really appropriate because we can hear you now. So,
well,
yeah, thanks for that tag there. We appreciate you giving us this time, and
well,
and
I
expertise.
enjoyed it. You can tell I enjoyed talking about it. But if you can, it really is a big deal to help people. And any questions, I'm really serious about that question thing. Any questions you got, just give me a call, and I'll be glad to answer them as best I can. And and I hope I answered your question. There may be further details you want on anything, and I can put you right to sleep. So don't hesitate to call me.
Thank you again.
Okay.
Okay.
Have a nice night, everybody.